Tonight a demon came into my head. Alright. And tried to show me in my sleep.
Hi guys, thanks for participating in this new project. It's called Visiones Eléctricas, which means electric visions. And as I told you before, the idea is like to make an in-depth interview of the band itself, like going throughout the entire history of the band from the very beginning to what comes nowadays. So I'd like to start from the very beginning, like asking, when was the band formed and how was the band formed?
Yeah, I guess it was like the late 2006. We just disbanded another band that we had, like Rickard and the drummer Axel had together. That I only played guitar, and I wanted to start singing again. And then we talked about starting this Graveyard Lamp. It was, yeah.
So, give me a sec. What would you consider your influences regarding the beginning of the band besides Black Sabbath? Like, would you consider yourself influenced or kind of influenced by like these Swedish hard rock, or progger bands like Beat, November, Saga, Kriget, or Bohansson and whatnot?
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah. I mean, it's never been just Black Sabbath, Even it was tons of bands in that era. I mean, as you said, all those bands, especially Bohansson and November, Roger Ryggen, it's really good. Also a lot of British and American and from everywhere.
Yeah, that's the thing. So, all Graveyard albums are credited to the whole band, right? How is the composition process of Graveyard itself?
We all kind of write, take turns, and you bring something to the table and practice, and it's just try things out. And sometimes one of us is writing a whole song, and sometimes everybody is involved in one song. So it can be, it differs very much, It can be.
Like it depends.
Yeah, it depends. But it's easier to write credits for the band.
So as long as the whole band agrees on the riff stays.
Yeah, exactly.
So, a year before your first debut album, you released a demo, right, on CDR. Was that demo officially released? Was it only sent to distribution to the press and whatnot?
Our first demo.
I mean, it's on Discogs. That's why I look it up. And it's like
Okay.
there's a demo before the first album.
Yeah.
Does it exist?
It's not official. But we put the songs out on MySpace that we had at that time. So I guess it was kind of an official release.
Somebody made a CDR of that.
Yeah, of course.
So, did you play it live before the release of this demo when you uploaded in MySpace, or did it begin afterwards?
I think we started playing live right away. We didn't. I mean, the first shows we didn't have enough songs, so we played the same song twice. I mean, I guess we still play. Started, but also we recorded the album pretty soon after we formed the band. So everything went really fast in the beginning.
So you haven't stopped performing since 2006, pretty much till now.
I guess the only little pause was during the COVID break, I guess.
Oh yeah. After you released this first demo, this unreleased demo, you released your first album. First on Transsubstance Records.
Yeah.
That's a Swedish label that also released prog and hard rock stuff,
Yeah,
right?
I think it's kind of connected to like a mail ordering company called I can't remember what it's called, but I mean it's a kind of small label, but it like went that big in the beginning. We were really happy getting a record of it.
That's the thing. A year after that, it was released on TP Records in the US, right?
Yeah.
So how did that came to be? Considering TP is also like a kind of a bigger label, I guess, not as huge as some others, but a bigger label.
Yeah, bigger underground label.
Yeah.
Well, we knew that the little record company Transubstance Records didn't have like the power of releasing an album in the whole world, especially not on the American market. So we needed more, and we got contacted by TP, Tony Persotto, for the work at TP, that after he heard the demo on MySpace. So that was yeah, but I mean, we had to do a little persuasion with the record label in Sweden to let them do that, give that market away to America. But I mean, they were kind enough to do it. Little money maybe.
So, on this first album, your current bassist, how do you pronounce Truls?
Truls.
Truls recorded guitars and also sang on a couple of songs.
Yeah.
But he wasn't present by the time the album was released, right?
No, he decided to pursue his art career at that time, and he wanted to. He went to the high school in like a higher education school in art, and so he left the band, and we brought in Jonathan. He's actually, I mean, both guitarists are on the first album. He's also recording a couple of solos and stuff. So they're both original guitarists.
Perfect. So, did you tour a lot with that release of the first album?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think did a lot of tours. I mean, we started touring US right after that, I think.
Yeah.
Little short tour. We played it southwest, and then we stopped.
Yeah. Some Europe. I think we toured for 4 years from that record. So
Yeah.
That's a long tour.
But we also recorded the Hissing and Blues at the same time,
Yeah.
kind of in between. So it took us a while to get that album done. Yeah.
So, just there comes the next questions regarding like 4 years passed before you released Hissing and Blues, like between your first and your second album, right?
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
So, what happened during that period? Like you said, touring. Did it take a long time to compose it? How was the process between the first and the second album?
I mean, it didn't feel that long. It didn't feel like it was 3-4 years between the albums. We were working on it, as I said, during touring and while we were at home. And also all of us had works then, also, so we had to like find time. But I mean, for us it didn't feel that long. It's because we were working on it constantly. We didn't feel like there was any problems writing the songs for. I think maybe just one of the songs were written in the last couple of weeks of recording. So I mean,
Where did the album name came from? Because I read Hisingen is like an island in Sweden, right?
yeah, one of the largest islands in Sweden. Yeah.
So are you original from there, or does it have has a connection to the album?
The song came first. The song Hissing and Blues, and we named the album after the song because we thought it's some fun. No, but yeah, as I said, Hisingen is an island with which a big part of Gothenburg is on that island. So, and I mean, it was Rickard who wrote the lyrics for that song, and he wrote that while living on Hisingen, and while troubles and everyday life for him when he lived there, I guess.
That's where it comes from.
Yeah.
So, on the inner sleeve of the Hisingen Blues CD banner, whatever, there's a drawing of this old man with a phrase that says, how do you pronounce that?
Vedervärdiga är de ofördärvade.
How would you translate that? Exactly, like what do you mean with it?
like the pure or the very very nice pure people appearing very nice and I don't know taken care of like it's just it's for show, you know. It's not like that, you know. It's
The
they're-
pure.
They're not.
I mean, maybe like the pure are disgusting. Maybe.
Yeah.
So that's installation. So that has a relation to lyrical concept of the album?
I can't. I don't think so. Maybe it was just a. It's just a phrase that's. I mean, it's funny, and it also has a. I mean, a meaning. You know, when we. For a person that is maybe not, you know, in the posh side of the higher layers of the society. You know, the rich and
The brats.
the brass kind of. It's funny that you feel like they think as us on the bottom like disgusting,
Yeah.
but we can also think as them as disgusting. Yeah.
I have a question regarding the recording process of the Hissingen Bulls album. Was it recorded live?
Well, yeah, kinda. We always record together, but we don't always save every because we do it the tracks separately.
Yeah.
We can redo guitars and so. But I mean, we always like to have the drums recorded live because we you know we get the like kind of live feeling in the songs.
So, okay, so recorded live. Have you ever recorded like analog wise, like
Yes.
direct to reel?
Yeah, always.
Always.
Only one recorded. The Peace album is recorded digitally, but all the other albums is recorded on tape.
Nice. So I have another question regarding the track on the album, which is Buying Truth. It has this subtitle called Takan Forlet. How you pronounce it?
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry and thank you.
So sort of thank you. So does that has something to do also with the lyrical concept beat of the track of the album? Does it has like a meaning? You
Yeah,
use
but
that Swedish words.
I mean, it has a meaning, but we don't need to talk about that.
Okay, perfect. It's okay, no problem. Man. So, by this time, I read that you played one of your biggest shows in your career back then, which is opening for Iron Maiden.
Yeah, there was a lot of people there. Yeah.
So, I read on an interview that from that period, which says you had a lot of fun on it, but you had way more fun afterwards. The show itself. Is that also not a question regarding the interview, not necessarily to be answered, or is it okay? It doesn't matter to ask like, what do you mean with it? Like the experience overall.
But it's, I don't know what exactly was it me who said that.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. But I don't know exactly what I mean. But it always feel like that. You know, before a show and during a show, there's a lot of pressure. But after the show, the pressure releases and it feels pretty nice. So it always feels a lot nicer after shows than before shows.
So, on the same period, you toured for a week in Germany with Motorhead, right?
Yeah.
So, how was the experience? How did it came to be? And did you enjoy it? Was something you were searching for, or did it just happen and took you by surprise?
Well, there were a period of our career that big bands wanted us as
Openers,
as
yeah.
openers, you know, when we were young and cool, you know.
Yeah.
I guess they asked us. I don't know. I can't remember how it.
Yeah, I think they were great. The guys in their crew and you know the whole Motorhead crew and the band was amazing.
Yeah.
They were very nice and it was an honor, you know, supporting. It was really good.
Yeah, we did a couple of shows with them in US too, in LA and San Francisco, and they are always really nice. And they were nice playing with them.
So, a year and a half later, not long after Hissingen Blues released Lights Out, right?
Yeah.
Was this album composed on the road, or did you have the songs from before? Or did you compose them before recording? And since they are so close and you were always touring.
I think the answer is with all of that. You know, some songs on well, sometimes we jam while we are sound checking.
Yeah.
But I think most of the songs were recorded in our rehearsal place, I guess, and together with the producer Don Asterberg that recorded the first 3 albums and now also the last album. He was a really big part of like arranging the songs, and you know, he's always been like an extended member of the band.
Yeah.
Would you consider there's a different musical approach between History Blues and Lights Out?
I think, babe, what do you think?
I think we got a little more pissed off, kind of lyric-wise, maybe in the Lights Out album. But otherwise, it's like I thought we were. My own impression is that Lights Out is a little rougher, harder.
They're a little darker, the lyric-wise is a little bit angrier, a little bit more politic maybe.
Yeah.
But as an album, and as how Graveyard sounded that back then, I think they are kind of similar in how they sound. They have like the same kind of set of songs on there. Maybe a little bit more developed than Hissing and Blues.
Just like the next step.
Yeah. Because every album with us feels like every album is a little bit going somewhere.
So maybe I'm getting a little bit too redundant with this, but so on this tour, yeah, you toured Europe with Soundgarden.
Yeah.
What was this? Well, it wasn't your first time supporting a band since you already did Motorhead and Maiden and whatnot. But were you a fan of the band before this happened? And
Well, I think I was the biggest fan. I listened to them a lot when I grew up. I was a real big fan. Still am actually. Yeah, that was fun. I think it was fun.
it was a good experience. Or?
Yeah. I mean, you can feel like Chris wasn't really happy back then either. He wasn't really that. Yeah, he was mostly hanging by himself and talked too much. But, I mean, the other guys was really nice hanging out with.
So around this time in 2014, I saw you live for the first and only time in the Malmo Festivalen.
All right.
That you played with Imperial Electric and Bataille, right?
Oh, yeah.
And by the end of the set, Nicky Anderson joined you and played a Helicopters cover. Right?
Yes, yeah.
Gotta get some action now.
Yes.
So this was before the Helicopters reunited, right?
Yeah.
I guess, yeah. I mean, the reason that we played that song was that we did a TV show together with the Hives in Germany at one time, and they wanted us, the TV company, the production wanted us to play a song together with them, and then we decided to do another song with another Swedish band, the Helicopters. And as Nicky were at the Malmö Festival, and we already knew that song, so it was kind of an easy choice for us to ask him to do that with us.
So was it something in the spur of the moment?
Yeah.
Or it wasn't planned at all?
No.
So you like Sonic in the backstage and told him, "Hey, we're gonna play this. Can you join us?" Something like that.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. Would you consider? Do you like the Helicopters, considering they are such a? I don't know if it's a huge band in Sweden, but would you consider the Helicopters like something you do like, something you like listening to? I don't know.
They always been a good rock band. I think I always enjoy their music and really nice people. You know.
So, well, afterwards you recorded an album with the producer of them, right? But I'm getting to that later.
Okay. Yeah. No.
So, so not long after touring for this album, your original bassist left the band, right?
Yeah.
So, did this change the dynamic in the band, like the way songs are composed and the touring and whatnot?
There's always a big change when another member comes in, you know. So it's, but it's, yeah, it was a little more, you know, it's hard to put your finger on, but because Ricky was great at what he was doing, and Troubles is great as well. So it's just a matter of small differences, and
it's obviously going to be a huge difference when in a 4-piece band we do, like replace one key member of the band. But I mean, as Truls came in, he's also a really talented songwriter and musician. So it's different, but it's still very good, I think. And also, I mean, there were reasons for Rickard to leave. I mean, and for us as a band, and we hadn't been able to do that for very long with him. I think we wouldn't be around if we tried to make him stay any longer. So it was the right decision.
3 years after Slide Out, you released your next album, which is Innocence and Decadence, right?
Yeah.
So this album has an incredible artwork. Were you a part of the concept, of the idea, or did it just came to you and you say, yeah, I like it, or you see the label thing?
There was this guy it was the same guy as did the Is in Blues cover, and he, you know, we trust him for it. So he came up with this idea for Innocence and Decadence, and we, you know, he kind of nails it, you know. So we were figuring if, you know, the colors were great and everything. I mean, everything was good about it. So we didn't have to work very hard on that part.
So it came there and you was like, yeah, it's amazing. It's gonna be used and that's it.
It's mostly just him. Yeah.
This album you recorded on Atlantis Gramophone Studio, right?
Yeah.
Which is like a big studio where ABBA
Really.
recorded.
Yeah, it's a really nice studio.
So, how was the experience recording in this big, I don't know if it's a big professional studio compared to the way you recorded before or the previous albums?
Well, I would say it's also a big difference for us because when we recorded the first 3 albums, we done the recording and the writing were at the same time. You know, we rearranged songs as we recorded it. But this time, all the songs were already done, and I mean, it's a big, nice studio. You know, it's also really expensive, so you can't be there for too long. You know, you have to be kind of like efficient when you're there. So
Things gotta be done fast.
yeah, but I mean, we had time, but you know, also it was chill and really relaxed also. But I enjoyed that recording period because it's nice to be like go there, play, and then be done with it. You know, it's kind of a nice thing. Then the albums can take a long time to finish otherwise.
It happens. So on this album, there's this song called "From a Hole in the Wall," which has this black metalish kind of part in the middle, right?
Yeah.
So how did that idea came to be? Because it's so unexpected when you're listening to a hard rock album to listen to, I don't know, like 10 seconds of a blast beat.
Yeah, it's Truls that wrote that song.
Yeah, he also sings on that song.
Yeah, so just, you know, when he presented the idea, it felt natural anyway, you know.
You all liked it right away and say, okay, it's staying, and that's it.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't remember how that part came to be, or if it was that much of a black metal part in the beginning. But maybe it's fun, you know. It's yeah, it has to be some. It has to be a little interesting and fun sometimes.
Yeah, it's a surprise. Let's say completely unexpected. A few years afterward, you split up for a few months, right?
Yeah,
With
maybe if you want to call it that.
okay, so also this time your drummer left, right?
Yeah.
So I've read on different interviews that he was like the main lyricist for the band when he was in the band.
Yeah, it was kind of split between Jonathan, Rickard, and Axel. So, and I did a couple of songs here and there, but mostly Jonathan and Rickard and Axel. Yeah.
So on this Peace album,
Yeah.
you recorded with Chips Kiespia.
Chips Kispia.
Kispia. So was it your choice to go with him regarding his discography, his work, and whatnot, or was it something that just kind of happened?
I mean, we knew that he was a good producer, you know.
Yeah.
And we knew about him, and I think our manager is a friend of him as well. So kind of got together that way.
He manages Chip's band too. It's called Sator, the Swedish band. Yeah, I can't really remember exactly how it went, but I mean, we wanted to try new things, we wanted to work with new people, and we knew him a little bit, and he wanted to do it. He had done really good work with other bands before, as he produced one of Helicopter's albums too.
Like I read he did like high visibility and like those earlier 2000s albums. I don't know, those are amazing albums. Probably my favorites of Helicopters. So for this tour, this album piece brought you for the first time to play in Latin America, right?
Yeah.
So how was the experience of traveling to Latin America, South America, and playing to? Well, I just asked you before this just before the interview, but I was just playing to this different kind of crowd, this Latin American crowd, which is usually considered a little bit more maybe wild,
Rowdy.
maybe crazy.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that. I mean, it can be like that in other places too. Not maybe in Sweden, but other places. I mean, we love it here. It's amazing here. So glad we could come back again.
When 2020 came and the pandemic hit, how did it affect you as a band, considering you were always touring and recording and playing and whatnot? Considering it's like a 2 to 3 years forced hiatus.
Yeah.
Hiatus.
That was awful. You know, with our livelihood and everything, like just swept away. You know, kind of it's a rough time. I feel like, but you know, we kept on, you know, writing a little, and for this last record, you know, so.
Yeah, we tried to record the last album during the pandemic, but it was hard to find. You know, at one point somebody had COVID, and next, you know, it was really hard to get the puzzles and pieces together. But as Jonathan said, it wasn't fun, like getting your livelihood swept away from you, and you kind of get out of the spin, of the rotation of how you're doing it, and you kind of start doing other stuff. And almost all of us have started working again because we weren't able to live our music anymore. And then you kind of do other stuff. So we haven't really gotten back to touring as much as we did before the pandemic.
So 6 months ago, you released your latest album, right? 6 months ago, right?
A year ago.
A year ago.
Or September 23.
So also a year and
A year
6
and a half,
months
yeah.
ago. Shit, sorry, I fucked up. So this is your longest period between albums. Would you say this is strictly because of how hard it was recording and working during the pandemic?
I mean, it wasn't all the pandemic, but it was part of that. Yeah, and also, you know, as we work now and have kids and separated parents, you know, and also the producer was really kind of hard to find time with, because he was touring. Apparently, he were able to tour with Jose Gonzalez.
Yeah.
It was a lot of different reasons why it took so long.
It was also really hard to know, like, when do we get to go, you know, tour on this record again, because that's what you want to do. You want to get out and do the live shows. Yeah.
6 was recorded in this on Silence Studios, which is far from the city, like in a small town, right?
It's not even a small town. It's like in the forest.
In the forest.
Yeah.
Did you choose to work on that studio?
Well, it's also a classic studio and a classic record label. I mean, that studio hasn't been there it's been there for a long time, but all the classic albums that the label released was recorded in a different location. But I mean, it's a really nice old studio that it's really cozy, and you get really, your phone doesn't work there, so you can't really be reached.
Completely isolated.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we started out there. We didn't get too far on the album there, but I would love to go back there sometime, record more. I mean, the rest of the album we recorded in the producer's own little studio in Gothenburg, as we did with all the 3 first albums.
you say that you would like to record there again sometime, right?
Yeah.
So, are there any plans for future? What's to come? New albums, new releases, and whatnot.
I think we have decided not be that long before we release an album. We have started.
Yeah.
We're really far from finished. But I mean, we have started. I mean, the idea in the head is there now, so it's
As long as it's there,
yeah.
just keep going on,
Yeah.
on and on and on. So, do you have any alternative projects, musically wise or art wise or whatnot?
No,
Nothing at all.
Not
it's,
me.
I don't even. I wouldn't have time for it.
Me neither. Because we are the separated parents, and we're
Kids. to
Kid-
take
Life
care
gets
of.
in the way.
yeah, exactly. Maybe Truls is the one who has most energy for doing stuff like that. But I don't think he has released a couple of albums on his own.
Yeah.
Two albums, his own name. They're really good. You should
Yeah.
check them out too.
So before, since we pretty much covered the entire career of the band, I want to go a little bit back and as I asked you about alternative projects, I want to ask you about your previous project to Graveyard, which was called Norsken.
Yeah, it was a long time ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it was Rickard who played bass in Graveyard, and drummer was Rickard, Kristoffer Sjödahl, who played in a band called Dead Man after that. It's a really nice band too. You should check that out if you haven't heard. And also it was Magnus Belander from Witchcraft. And we were kids, wild, rowdy kids who liked to drink and play music. It was wild.
Was that your first approach to music, or did you had a band before?
I had
Norsken?
several bands before that. I started out playing punk rock music, and after that I had a grunge band. Then started Norrken. Yeah, it's been a lot of bands.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but now this is the band. That's the thing.
yeah. For me, anyways.
So, well, I'd say that's pretty much it, since I've covered pretty much everything.
Right.
Thanks for participating, and thanks for answering my question and taking the time to do it.
Cool.
Oh,
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys.
Thank you.